gave us a new levy limit of $89 million. The levy ceiling is nothing more than 2.5% of the total value of your community. So it's as if some reason you were able to access 2.5% of your total community value. That's what that number is, $335 million. It's not related in any fashion to money that's accessible. So once we add in the debt exclusion there, and then we have money from the Cape Cod Commission, our maximum allowable levy this year is $91.8 million. So the options that you are going to talk about are going to be how to allocate that $91.8 million. Who's going to pay it? Here's the basic number that we're all interested in. Our actual total valuation in town dropped by about $1.1 billion this last year. That results with the slight increase, relatively slight increase in the tax levy to a tax rate now of $6.85 potentially. Barring anything unusual, that will be the single tax rate. Now last year that single tax rate was $6.12. So as you can probably surmise, that increase is directly related into the combination of an overall about 8% reduction in total town value along with the allowed 2.5% levy increase. So you got a little larger levy, you got a lot less value to split it among, you've got a significant 73-cent increase in the tax rate. Option one is going to be, we'll talk about as a split tax rate, and it is going to refer to what happens to the residential rate when you move the money over to commercial, industrial, personal property, and how much at what point. This shift amounts between the classes, so it's between residential and all the other types, the CIP. And it's closely related always to the percentage of taxable value of the town. The point has been made by certain citizens in the past that the residential portion of the value or the portion of town was paying more and more and more of the levy. Well, that's to be expected when the value is a higher percentage. When that changes, as the drop in value of the residential side is shown, that changes the mixture again. So what we see now is the residential percentage of the value in town is now down to 88.5% from 89.26, so it's sliding, while the commercial, industrial, personal is up to 11.48% when it was 10.74. So they're carrying a larger share of the levy already just by virtue of their percentage. So if you shift the rate 150%, which is the most you can do that, this would bring the residential rate down to $6.41. There's a formula that Department of Revenue applies that says there's a minimum residential amount you are allowed to do based upon the mix in your town. That's the 0.9351 number up there. That simply translates in you can drop the rate 6.4% at maximum. That's the most you can do for the residential side. And that would create a 150% increase on the commercial, industrial, personal side and take the tax rate up to $10.28. So there are the options at the extremes on those two rates. The ratio of dollars, as we talk about every year, is really what matters. So the ratio in this case is 7.7 to 1. Now, if you recall from last year's discussion, it was closer to 9 to 1. And this is always because of the percentage of the levy of the two classes. As the residential portion drops, this ratio will drop too. As the proportion goes up, if this went higher than 9% for residential, then you would see that ratio go up again as well. However, the most that can be shifted dollar-wise between the classes out of that 91 total $1 million is $5.2 million. That's the most that can actually be moved over to commercial, industrial, personal. So there are the tax rate options at the different points. You're starting with a $6.85 rate for both sides. That would be 1.0, which I don't put up there. And these are just numbers for you to look at so you can see the incremental effect. It's about 4 cents per step down on the residential side for every percentage that you would move, while on the commercial side, it's about 34 cents that it would go up for every 0.5%, 0.05% that you might decide to shift the rate. I'll let you look at that on your own time. This is an actual chart. We're using $500,000 every year just because it's a convenient number. The average residential house value went down to about $578,000 this year. But using a consistent value of $500,000 for a commercial property and a residential property gives you apples and apples at least. So that as you see how the rate changes, the blue down there is the dollar advantage that would be seen by the residential taxpayer at each step of that commercial rate shift. The red is the additional tax burden that the commercial, industrial, personal property taxpayer would see as a result of that same shift. And it is consistently up there, if you look at the two numbers, about a 7 to 8 to 1 ratio, depending on where you are in there. These are the actual dollar amounts at those same points. It's just a little more graphic. It's the same thing you saw on the bar chart. It's just the actual dollar amounts themselves. Here's another chart that you can peruse on your own, since this is just informational. At this point, this is something for you to consider at the different stages and at the different levels of valuation and how they would be affected. The right column is the net shift effect. If you add the savings of the residential property and the extra tax for the commercial, industrial, personal property, that's the net difference in taxes. So just keep that in mind, if you would, please. Now that's what the shift would do. There are your dollars.